On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy.
So, what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode, we have the final part of my talk with Daniel Perez, the famous Bigfoot researcher, and the first part of my talk with our new Canadian representative, David Scott, who talks about some frightening and very interesting subjects.
I really like the old credits.
You can't tell me what to do. You're not my real ladder. No, he's his step ladder.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. Every Wednesday evening at 6:30 and every Saturday afternoon at 3, I bring you what I used to call a potpourri or a mélange, but then I decided that using French phrases for no reason at all was pretentious, and pretentious? Moi? Non! So now I call it a whole general mishmash, which is something I got from a Douglas Adams novel. And please, anybody out there who has read the Douglas Adams novel in question can tell me which one it is. I would be very, very grateful. So please go and write that in the notes if you know. Now I call it a whole general mishmash of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, you're going to have to ask Mr. Freeman.
Nareek, Nareek, Nareek. That's a lizard, isn't it, Alan?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting show for you today. But to start off, Lilith's coming to say hello, because as far as she's concerned, she is actually the presenter. She's not even co-presenter, she is the presenter of this show.
Hello, good evening, and welcome.
But now Lilith has arrived, I want to take you straight to the west coast of the United States, where we have the third and final part of my long and interesting chat with Daniel Perez. It must have been very interesting and quite moving when you first met Bob Gimlin, somebody who's so much a part of Bigfoot history.
Well, the first time I met Bob Gimlin was in 1990, and I always thought to myself, you never want to give your eyewitnesses an opportunity to rehearse their story. And so in 1990, again, the internet really wasn't in place, and I was up in Seattle at the time at the Goodwill Games that summer. And so on my way back to Los Angeles, I made a decision to detour over to Yakima, Washington, where Bob Gimlin lived. And I knew his address, and I made a decision just to go by without calling him. So I showed up at his ranch, and he just happened to be outside with a horse that he was breaking in. And at the time, it looked like he broke his lower arm because he had a cast on. And so I pulled up and I told him who I was, and he knew who I was. And so we just instantly started talking. And I didn't have a tape recorder at the time, but I did have a camera. And one of the key things that he said to me about what had happened with Roger Patterson, he said that what was in front of him was real. And he said it moved like, this is a direct quote because I'll never forget this. He said it moved like a well-oiled machine, that whatever was there was very comfortable with itself as it was walking on that Bluff Creek sandbar.
Wow.
So
That must be
again,
fantastic.
I had 100% confidence in his report.
It's just such a big pity that Roger Patterson died so young.
Yeah, he could still be living today. He'd be, I guess, middle 80s or something. I'm not exactly certain right now what date he was born, but yeah, it's a pity that his achievement, in my view, because I've given talks on it before, is that I've explained to the audience, and maybe it's hard to wrap your mind around it, but in all of anthropology, period, I'm not just talking about Bigfooting, I'm talking about all of anthropology. Everything that anthropology that has ever done in terms of looking at our ancestors is by way of looking at fossils of our ancestors that have been dead millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago, from Neanderthal to whatever the case may be in terms of our ancestors. And it's interpreting that data, say the fossil finds of Lucy from Latoli, it's interpreting that data is where we try to make sense of it. And then you fast forward to 1967, and a man from Yakima, Washington, does his own anthropology, but in real time, and gets a film of something that isn't part of antiquity, but part of the current affair, in the sense that he is actually filming an ancestor of us that is walking on a sandbar. And it just blows your mind that one day perhaps society or the scientific community will realize that what Roger did was the biggest thing ever in all of anthropology, because he didn't collect some dusty fossils from Africa. He actually got a film of something that is supposed to have been extinct from a long time ago that's still living. So that really is a singular, gigantic, monumental accomplishment. And so, in my view, Roger Patterson, who really doesn't get much credit for it, pulled off the greatest feat ever in anthropology. And I think one day in the future, especially if they do get a Bigfoot, is that we'll realize the immensity of his discovery.
Yes, I agree totally. Because there's never been a better piece of film, has there? I mean, there've been other Bigfoot films, but none of them, I think, approach the Patterson-Gimlin film for clarity or for...
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up, is that Roger Patterson's movie is by far the gold standard of what a Bigfoot film should look like, because here it was shot in broad daylight. A couple of things that are noteworthy or worthy of underscoring is that what Roger Patterson did that day is, number one, he got film of what he claimed to have seen. And so he's got the photographic evidence. Number two is that there were two eyewitnesses that saw what he was filming, himself and Bob Gimlin. Number three is that he immediately disclosed the location of where this happened. It wasn't like he had faked something and he said, well, if they knew the location of the film site, that would give it away. He gave that information away almost immediately within the end of the month as to where he shot that film, because Bob Titmus from Canada, a Bigfooter that was investigating Bigfoot, immediately came down to the Patterson-Gimlin film site within that month, because Roger told him where the location was. And so that's point number three. Point number four is that footprints were left behind of the subject that was filmed. And so Roger had the presence of mind to load up his camera with a second roll of film and shoot that film of the footprints in the sandbar as well. So that told another story. So if it were a bank robber leaving the bank, not only did you get a picture of the bank robber taking off, but you got his prints on the ground as well. And so that's point number four. So point number five would be that after they made the film of the footprints, they made plaster of Paris castings of some of the footprints that were left behind that Roger deemed the best tracks that were on the sandbar. And so they collected all this evidence, and he shared all this evidence readily with the public And so there was never any deception on his behalf. It's only that the opinions of people that say, well, it's just a man in a gorilla costume. And someone pointed out, I guess on the Bigfoot forums once, he said something, if I could quote him, I can't think of his name right now, but it was one of the most profound things I've ever heard about the Patterson-Gimlin film. And it went something like, the Patterson-Gimlin film looks like a man in a gorilla costume until you really see a man in a gorilla costume.
Mm.
And so that is essentially where you could see the difference.
I suppose what you need to do now is to go and take somebody in the gorilla costume we know is a gorilla costume and film them doing that.
Yeah. And see, what most people don't realize, and I think I pointed this out to someone else that interviewed me, and in fact, it's February. Last month, I was down in Hollywood, or the Hollywood area, on behalf of the History Channel, and they wanted to do some filming for a show that I guess they have in serial production. They wanted to interview me, and I think I pointed out to them that what most people don't realize is the late Eric Beckjord, who was part of Bigfooting and part of cryptozoology for a while, with his far out and wild and unbalanced ideas. You probably know of him.
Yes, I knew him.
Eric Beckjord?
Yes.
Yeah, so what most people don't realize is that he was capable at certain times of doing some really good work. So I think it was about 1982 or 1983, because he was very familiar with cameras and stuff, that he actually took a Kodak K100 camera, the same type of camera that Roger Patterson used, and he took that camera down to the Patterson-Gimlin film site, because at the time he knew where it was, with a man in a gorilla costume, and he tried to do like for like. I can't say I've ever seen the film, but a colleague of mine, Warren Thompson, did see the film, and he did point out to me that Eric Beckjord's film, compared to the film of Patty, is like night and day. And so that by itself is a pretty interesting comparison.
Beckjord was a strange man. I always got on okay with him, but he used to phone me up in the middle of the night and start criticizing my wedding photos. He was a very, very strange man.
Yeah, he was out there. He just I'm not sure what his deal was, but I know that he passed on. I want to say it was probably 2012 at the age of 69. So he didn't live a very long life, and he didn't take care of himself as well. That I do know, and that he did have, from what I was told, he did have a little bit of a drinking problem.
I heard that as well. My old friend Paul Vella used to talk about him quite a lot. He used to talk about you as well. So
I had the pleasure of meeting Paul Vella in 2012 when I was in London for the Olympic Games. So when I was there, I forget how it went, but we got a hold of one another. And because I'm so focused on one thing or a few things, that he said something like, "Do you want to go see Stonehenge?" And I guess this is a little bit embarrassing. I didn't even know that Stonehenge was in the UK. I didn't know that. And he said, "Oh, it's not far from London. We'll drive up and we'll grab a bite to eat." So this was the first and only time that I went to Stonehenge, and it was the second time I had met Paul Vella, because I had met him previously in Willow Creek in 2003 when they had the International Bigfoot Symposium, and he was there. So that was the in 2012. It was the second and only time, second time I had met Paul Vella, and we went to visit Stonehenge.
And then Paul Vella died about 5-6 years ago.
Yes, unfortunately he passed away, and it was kind of a shock because he wasn't that old.
No, but he had very, very, very bad diabetes. And he told, because one, I'm a diabetic, and two, I used to be a nurse. So he used to phone me up and talk about his symptoms, and they were
much, much worse than anybody else I know. So I wasn't surprised when his brother phoned me up to tell me he'd gone. But he was a good guy. So you retire in a few years' time, and then you're going to hit the road and go Bigfooting and do it permanently.
My plan is to be a lot more active in the field, because it's just like when you have to work, it doesn't allow you a lot of time. Maybe 1-2 week time period in the year to get out and do your Bigfooting, and the rest of the time you're having to make a living. And so those don't set you up for good odds at finding anything. But if you were out there on a more continuous basis, I think you would have better luck. In fact, I'm sure you would.
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on you and see how you do. And if you do have better luck, or even if you don't, please come back and talk to us again. It's lovely to see you.
That I will. Now, for those people who don't know about what I produce, it's the Bigfoot Times, and you can see the Bigfoot Times. Just go to bigfoottimes.net, and you can get the membership to the newsletter, and it actually gets mailed to you in the postal mail. It's not a digital newsletter. It's a physical newsletter that is printed and is mailed out to a membership. So I hope that soon that more people will jump on board.
I hope so too.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a guy called David Scott. You will remember, I hope, that we did a long interview with his daughter Carol, who has recently published a book on the mystery animals of South Asia and Oceania. And after that conversation, I was talking to her, saying that we needed somebody to take over the Canadian office of the CFZ, since poor Robin has been too ill to do it, and she suggested her dad. So I started talking to her dad. He's now got the job, and here he is talking about all sorts of Canadian mysteries.
It's very good of you to come and join me this afternoon. I'm very, very grateful.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, the question one always asks when one doesn't know the answer is, how did you first get involved or interested in cryptozoology?
It had to be when I was a child. UFOs were very big. It's about 1970, I'd say, 69, 70. I got really interested in UFOs, and I ran with that for many a year. I was one of the first members of MUFON.
Wow.
And I worked on the MUFON radio network. I don't know if you remember that. It was a grouping of CB radio enthusiasts that would share reports by CB. We would relay it down to Seattle, I think is where they are, or where Indiana. MUFON's headquarters is in Indiana. We would share or relay down to that. I had my own personal UFO sighting in 72, 73, which was really strange. We really didn't know what it was at the time, but we did have a CF-4, which is the Voodoo fighter from the Canadian Armed Forces, Air Force, fly over us at the time. So we kind of got thinking, well, there's something to this, but, and then I kind of drifted away from everything. I was interested in Bigfoot, of course, because it was very big at the time too, with the Patterson Gimlin film coming out. And I'm kind of one of those curious people. It's just kind of, I want to know, I want to see what this is. But I did drift away from it for a while. And when Carol was born, Carol had a real fascination. My daughter Carol, she had a super fascination in cryptids when she was very young. So it kind of re-piqued my curiosity, and here we are. She's kind of dragged me back into it, and no, I probably will never leave again.
Well, you better not.
You're our best regional rep.
Oh, thank you. Now you're going to love this new article I'm working on.
Well, I am
It,
really looking forward to it.
it's a rabbit hole dug out a bit. So it's two computers, two cell phones, all going at the same time doing research. It was quite the adventure yesterday. After I spoke with you yesterday, it really opened up. I even learned some more, and I have changed my mind. I never want to go there. It's just too scary.
It sounds it. I was interested in what you wrote about the Lake Champlain Basin and the monsters there. Would you like to expand a bit?
Yeah, that's actually another rabbit hole that continues. I had the pleasure of reading Katie Elizabeth's new book, and it's changed my views on a lot of things. I try to keep a very open mind, and I'm open for new information coming in, and I'm not set in my ways. Like, not everything is a certain thing, So I really think Champlain has something in it. There is something there that is not giant catfish, giant pike, sturgeon, hornbeaked whale. Some of the things that have been said about it. I didn't realize there's footprints on the shore at Champlain. I'd never seen that before, so I found that extremely fascinating. That article actually started off as just going to be a little blurb on the Chats Lake monster, because we knew what it was, we knew what they were seeing, and so it had a plausible explanation for it. And Chats Lake monster was a giant eel. It was an 11-foot eel that was caught off my hometown back in the 40s. The loggers actually captured it and killed it and brought it on shore. Of course, back then it was just like, oh, that was a big eel, and they threw it back on the water when they were done. Nothing was ever captured. No real interest, but I did manage to find some people that were our age back then, were not our age back then, but were old enough to remember it. And they filled me in on a lot of details on it. So, and I kind of went with that, especially I did, a friend of mine works for the Ottawa, he's a volunteer with the Ottawa Valley River Keepers, which does all the populations and that's where I got the dam information about them being trapped, so they couldn't go out and breed, so they couldn't die. So they just kept eating and eating and eating. And I finally got a hold of a message back from the professor at Carleton University that did the study on, what is his name, Elvis, in Dowds Lake. And he said, yes, it was a 35-foot long North American eel that they videotaped under the water. So it's kind of like, okay, you get something like that surviving for so long, because Elvis has always been there as long as I can remember. So that fish is, a good 60 years old. Why not something else in Lake Champlain? And Ogopogo, I think, is another one that is not just something suffering from giganticism. That's the word, right?
Gigantism, but yeah.
Yeah, gigantism. Yeah. So there's definitely something in some of the waterways that are not explained.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page, and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell, or else you won't be told when the next show's going to be. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? Regular viewers of the show will know that for the last couple of months I've been including a piece about how my brother, who is a clergyman living and working in Germany, has been running a project in order to send things called Kelly's kettles to Ukraine. These are kettles which can cook and heat without an external power source, just with a handful of twigs or dry leaves or pine cones. Well, today I had this message from him. Hi Jonathan, I hope you are okay. Good news. We raised enough for 60 Kelly kettles in the end, which have now arrived safely in Romania. They will be taken to Kiev next weekend. We want to raise funds to send more, but we want to wait until we receive feedback first. Could you help us by taking down any advertising you have for the kettles for the time being? We do not want to accumulate more funds just yet. Please feel free to share the above with your readers and thank all who have supported the project so far. Well, I want to say a big thank you to you all from me. I'm very, very proud to know that members of the extended CFZ family have been so generous. And that's about it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back on Wednesday, and what am I going to be talking about on Wednesday? I've got absolutely no idea. And what am I going to be talking about on Saturday? Well, we're going to have David Scott back, and we've got our guests, Richard Freeman and Richard Muirhead. So, it just goes to me to say thank you to my guests this week, who were David Scott and Daniel Perez. Thank you very much to my producer, Louis, and to my deputy, Graham, who is also my carer and the guy who at the moment seems to spend most of his time either taking Archie to the vet or pushing me round and round the labyrinthine corridors of North Devon's hospitals in my wheelchair. So, like I said, I'll be back soon, and as long as you're there to watch, I'll be seeing you.